Notre Dame has a great chance to make a run at the college football playoff this season, but they're going to need big years from these 5 players in order to make that happen. That's coming right up.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast, and today is Wednesday, February 28th, and thank you for getting your day started right here by making this your first listen of the day. I'm Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer covering college football for Fox Sports, and this show is free and available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching along on YouTube, please like the video below and subscribe to the channel, or if you're listening to the podcast, please rate the show 5 stars, leave a nice review, and subscribe if you have not already. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Believe it or not, we're getting closer to the start of spring practice, and with that, I want to spend today's show on 5 key players who I'm going to be watching closely throughout the spring and throughout the summer and into fall camp because I believe they could be the difference between Notre Dame being a good team and one who can make a serious run in the college football playoff. I'm not talking about a team who just makes it. I'm talking about a team who wins a game or 2 or maybe even 3. You never know. If all 5 of these guys break out and have huge seasons, there's a good chance that Notre Dame could be in there at the very end. Now, these aren't necessarily the best players on the team or the most proven. We're going to spend a lot of time on those guys anyway as the season progresses. But if Notre Dame wants to be an elite team next season or anything close to it, these 5 players need to emerge in a big way. So let's start at number 1, and this one is pretty obvious. It's quarterback Riley Leonard. So what makes him an X factor? Well, if Riley Leonard has a great season, Notre Dame is going to have a great season. Those two things go hand in hand. And if he has a bad year, Notre Dame's probably going to have a pretty bad year too. Now, there's some middle ground for sure. If Riley Leonard is just a solid quarterback, Notre Dame could still be a really good team. They're probably going to lean on their defense anyway. So as long as he's not turning the ball over a ton and he just kind of stays above average, Notre Dame should be fine. That's a team who could make the college football playoff, but they're not going to be a team who really makes a run in it if Riley Leonard is not at least very good as the starting quarterback for Notre Dame in his only season with the Fighting Irish. And I don't think there's any debate. He's coming off a pretty disappointing season. Last season, he only played a total of 7 games, but it's really more like 5 because he got hurt at the very end of the Notre Dame game, which is his 5th game of the season. And then he tried to play 2 more games dealing with an ankle injury, and then he had a foot injury too. So those last 2 games, I don't really even count them against Louisville and Florida State. But when you look at the stats in totality, it's gross. He finished with just over 1,100 pass yards, 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. He did add 352 yards on the ground and 4 rushing TDs. For his career, he's got a 62% completion rate, 24 passing touchdowns to 10 interceptions. He has over 1,200 rushing yards, which is pretty incredible for a quarterback that's really only played 2.5 years of college football. And he averages 5.3 yards per carry, which is even more impressive than any of those rushing numbers because sacks are taken into account as well. So the fact that he was able to average 5.3 yards per carry despite getting sacked is really impressive. 19 total rushing touchdowns. He finished in the top 30 in QBR in 2022. So there are certainly some ways you can kind of talk yourself into Riley Leonard based on these stats, and then there's easy arguments against him as well. It really just sort of depends on what side you want to take there. So it's difficult to predict what exactly Riley Leonard is going to do in his lone season with the Fighting Irish. I feel like I've been pretty open about my doubts about the type of player that Riley Leonard is going to be in his 1 year. I don't think he's going to be bad by any stretch, but I don't know. I see the raw talent. I know that he has an incredibly high ceiling. There's certainly no doubt about that, but he just hasn't shown enough consistency in his career for me to think that he's going to be able to do that for an entire season. And I know that 2022, he had a really good year, played in every game. The schedule that he played at Duke in his sophomore season it was not spectacular. And even though Notre Dame isn't going to have the most difficult schedule either, most likely in 2024, the stakes are going to be a lot higher. And if they win those games, then all of a sudden you're going to start to see some real tough opponents there at the very end. So I think he's going to have a good season, but I think he's just going to have some games where you're like, man, he's not really seeing the field that well. He's not being very accurate with the ball. Maybe he's not running as well as you would have hoped for. But then there's also going to be some games you're like, Riley Leonard is a freak. He's the best quarterback Notre Dame has had in recent years. So I just think that we're going to be dealing with a lot of up and downs from him next season. But if he's able to play to his full potential, strap in, because it's going to be a really, really fun season. And I think that really, if he has that type of season, Notre Dame is going to be a really, really good football team. And number 2, I've got Jaylen Sneed. I feel like with him, his career hasn't necessarily lived up to the expectations that a lot of us had for him coming out of high school when he was a 5-star prospect. He was considered the type of player that Notre Dame really couldn't land if not for Marcus Freeman. Marcus Freeman initially recruited him as the defensive coordinator, then he was elevated to the head coach, and he was the type of guy that got you really excited about what the future could hold with Marcus Freeman. Now, there's been other prospects who have sort of fit that mold ever since, but Sneed was sort of the guy coming out of high school, and so far he hasn't really lived up to those expectations, but it's pretty clear whenever he's on the field, like, he's one of, if not the best athletes on the entire field, so the potential is there. But it kind of feels like now or never with him. Like, if he's going to be the great player that we thought he was going to be coming out of high school, we got to start seeing it this year. And Notre Dame right now, they only have one proven linebacker returning next year in Jack Kaiser. They need to replace a lot of production from J.D. Bertrand and Maris Leofau. You got to look at Drake Bowen. He's going to be playing baseball throughout the spring. I'm not really sure what his involvement is going to be with the football team during the spring practice. So I think that presents a huge opportunity for Jaylen Sneed to step up and make a name for himself, even though that him and Drake Bowen don't play the same linebacker spot. Drake is going to play the Mike, and then Jaylen Sneed is the rover. But if you look at what he's done in his career so far, he only played 39 snaps as a true freshman. He had a lot of growing to do, mostly physically. Like, he came in to college pretty skinny for a linebacker, but he bulked up, and he's continuing to bulk up. And then last season as a true sophomore, or a redshirt freshman, I should say, he played 231 snaps. He finished the season with 14 total tackles, and then he had that sack and the forced fumble against USC. That was a big moment for him. He also had a huge play on 4th and goal against Ohio State, made a big pass breakup, and I felt like at that time that could be like a taking off point for Jaylen Sneed, but it really wasn't. He still kind of played sparingly throughout the year. He made 6 stops, according to Pro Football Focus, but my big concern with him is that he also had 6 missed tackles last season, which was 6th on the team, despite the fact that Sneed was only 17th on the defense in snaps. So that number is a little bit high. I also think it doesn't take into account some plays where he didn't necessarily register a missed tackle, but took a really poor angle at the ball and wasn't where he was supposed to be to make a tackle. And even though that doesn't show up on the stat sheet, when you're watching the game and you're focusing on what the defense is doing, you can see that Sneed missed the play there. And I feel like he needs to really tighten that up, because he is so athletic and he's so fast and he can make plays all over the field. But there's so many times where it looks like he's totally out of control. And I'm hopeful that going into his 3rd season, he's able to figure that out a little bit, tighten things up. And also, this is going to be his 3rd year with Al Golden. And if he's able to mature, learn the playbook, and continue to develop, he could have a really big season next year. We know what he can do rushing the passer. There's never been any question about that. Last year, he was used a lot in that role, and he's good at it. Like, he causes havoc in the backfield. Sometimes, though, he'll run right by the quarterback, and it's a little bit frustrating. But still, he's there. He's a guy who can make plays, and he has the physical traits that you can't really teach. And it's things that offensive linemen really struggle with, especially coming off the edge. So really the question with Sneed is, can he put it all together? Can he be a complete linebacker, someone who can get after the quarterback, stop the run, and cover guys in space? That part remains to be seen with Jaylen Sneed. He's most likely going to be the starting rover, but that's a position that gets taken off the field a lot for the nickel, which is basically been Notre Dame's base defense a lot over the course of the past 2 seasons. So during spring practice, I would love to hear Al Golden or Max Bull rave about Sneed's knowledge of the playbook and his effort and intensity every single day. Because when you read through the tea leaves of press conferences, things that Al Golden has said publicly, Max Bull, even Marcus Freeman, it seems like the issue with Sneed has been bringing it on a day-to-day basis, being locked in, and never really wavering. Like, if he can just kind of come with max effort every single day, I feel like the sky is the limit for him. And like I said, he's a little bit older. He's a little bit more mature now. I feel like there's reason to be optimistic about what Jaylen Sneed can do heading into his 3rd season with the Fighting Irish. And if he does, And if he makes that leap, it's going to be really, really hard for Max Bola and Al Golden to take him off the field, and that could set him up for a really great year. Okay, coming up next, there's one player who has the potential to silence some concerns about a key position group if he's able to step up. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With great deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for all of the fun you're going to have. I actually just used Gametime recently to buy tickets for a comedy show. It's not something you would normally think of when you think of Gametime. I think a lot of times you think about buying tickets for sporting events, but don't sleep on comedy shows. There's a lot of great comedians that come through here in LA, and then there was this one guy who was like, you know what, I'd like to see him. It's kind of late. Are there any tickets left? One on Gametime. Not only were there tickets left, they were cheap, bought it, went, and had a great time, all thanks to Gametime. It is the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You get images of every seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect once you arrive. Plus, you can buy tickets in a matter of seconds, just 2 taps and you're set. And the tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Before we continue with my biggest X factors on the Notre Dame roster this season, this is a reminder to please subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, coming in at number 3, I've got Charles Jaga. Now, what makes him an X factor? There's 2 things. First of all, he made his first career start in the bowl game, and he played the second most important position on the offensive side of the ball. He started at left tackle, and that is a huge question mark going into next season for Notre Dame. The left tackle position and also really the right tackle position, and if you really want to branch it out, you could say the entire offensive line. I feel like I've been pretty vocal about the fact that going into next season, the offensive line is my biggest question mark, and I think could be potentially the biggest variant for Notre Dame's success going into next season. So it's not all on Jaga to fix that, right? Like, it's probably not going to be one guy and all of a sudden, like, Jaga steps up and then any other concern you have about the offensive line goes away. Like, I don't think it works like that. But I think he's the biggest difference maker in the group if he does step up in a big way, because I feel like he could calm down a lot of those concerns. And then if you have stability at left tackle, I feel like Notre Dame feels pretty good about the interior on the offensive line. They got to figure out who's going to start there at the guard positions between Rocco Spindler, Billy Schrauth, and Pat Coogan. Then you've got Ashton Craig, who seems to have solidified his starting spot at the guard position. And then right tackle is another battle with Emil Wagner and Tosh Baker. So don't get me wrong, there's still question marks for the group as a whole. But if Jaga is able to step up, have a big spring practice, and lock that down, that should make us feel a lot better about that group heading into next season. If you look at what he's done so far in his career, not a whole lot. Like I mentioned, he's only appeared in 2 games. He made his first career start at left tackle in the Sun Bowl, but he played some garbage time at guard against Stanford. So there's really not a whole lot to work off of based on what he did in actual games. But if you look back when he was a recruit, he was the highest rated prospect in Notre Dame's class of 2023. I think On3 had him as the 10th overall prospect in the entire class. But then there was a site like Rivals who had him outside of the top 100. I feel like most of the sites had him around the top 50. So there's plenty of talent. There's plenty of reason to believe that Jaga could be a really good player at the college level, but he's still very young and inexperienced. In that game against Oregon State, he did give up a sack for the most part. I thought he held his own against a pretty depleted front. So I felt like that was encouraging, but I don't know if we're going to be talking about that one game is like, oh, well, because he played in that game, he's no doubt going to be the starter. I still think he's going to have to earn that job in the spring. So there's still so much we don't know about him and what his role is going to be, and I think that's part of the reason why he's such an X factor. There's just the unknown with him. I assume he's going to start. I just don't know where, to be honest. Like, there's a chance that he could move over to right tackle. Joe Rudolph could mix things up in the spring practice. It's a great time for that, right? Like, if you don't know what combination is your best 5 on the offensive line, the spring practice sessions are a great way to sort of experiment, move some guys around, see what works, see what doesn't, and I would expect Rudolph to do that this spring practice, and Jaga is going to be a big piece in that. But I still think the fact that he went from the bottom of the depth chart when fall camp started because he wasn't an early enrollee freshman. He had shoulder surgery. He showed up to campus out of shape, and that's really not his fault, right? He was recovering from a major surgery. So I didn't really put that against him, and I just sort of chalked it up as like, well, he's going to redshirt this season. We're probably not going to hear anything about him until next year. And then boom, there he is in the starting lineup in the Sun Bowl at left tackle. So the fact that he was able to make that jump in just one season, I think is really, really impressive. And as far as we know, he hasn't been dealing with any other injuries so far during winter workouts. So you think that if he was able to make that kind of a leap during the season, he could make an even bigger leap going from his freshman season to his sophomore year. Now, we're still just a few months into the offseason, so he's not going to make that entire leap in just a few months, even including spring practice and all of that. But I feel like he's going to take control of a position this spring, most likely left tackle, given what he did, or given the fact that he played that position in the bowl game. But I still think that Charles Jaga is going to be one of the most interesting players to follow throughout the spring and really heading in to next season for Notre Dame. All right, at number 4, Christian Gray. This could have been Jaden Mickey, I'm going to be honest, but I picked Christian Gray because if I had to pick one player on the entire roster who I think could have a Xavier Watts type of a breakout year in 2024, I think it's Christian Gray. Now, there's several factors in all of this. How Gray performs is going to have a domino effect on the rest of Notre Dame's secondary. Like, if Gray locks down that field corner spot and he's never going to come off the field, I think Jaden Mickey is going to be fighting for any playing time. I still think he could be a quality reserve, but Benjamin Morrison's never coming off the field. We know that for a fact. And if Christian Gray can get anywhere close to Morrison's level, then, it's going to be tough sledding for the reserve cornerbacks. But then you also have the nickel position, right? Because there's a world where Christian Gray plays so well that he plays field cornerback, but maybe not so well that he keeps Jaden Mickey off the field entirely, and then Jaden Mickey could come in when Notre Dame goes in nickel, and Mickey could play field corner, and then Christian Gray could move into the box and play nickel. If that happens, that means Jordan Clark, the transfer out of Arizona State, is probably not going to see a ton of action. Same with Clarence Lewis as well. So there's a lot that goes into this, and in my opinion, though, Gray is the only one of those guys who I just mentioned who has the chance to be truly great. And if he is, then Notre Dame is going to have one of the best defensive backfields in all of college football next season. In his true freshman season, he played 198 total snaps. He finished with 9 tackles, 2 passes deflected, and 1 absolutely insane interception against Pitt. Like, that one play showed me pretty much all I needed to know about the type of player that Christian Gray is going to be. And I know that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but still, his athleticism, everything about him was on display in that one play. So it's really, really exciting to think about what he could do with more experience and more snaps under his belt. He allowed just 7 receptions on 19 targets for 86 yards on the year. He was a top-rated prospect coming out of high school. He's another one of those guys who Notre Dame probably wouldn't get if not for Marcus Freeman and Mike Mickens. So he's got a really, really high ceiling, and I feel like there's a possibility that Christian Gray has the chance. I feel like he could immediately fill Cam Hart's shoes. Now, that might seem like a stretch, and Cam Hart had an absolutely incredible season last year as a fifth-year senior for Notre Dame, and I'm really happy for him given all the injuries that he sustained during his career. But when Cam Hart started at Notre Dame, he was a wide receiver. It took him a little bit of time to learn the cornerback position. Like, Christian Gray stepped on campus and was a really solid corner who had experience, and he was ready to make some plays at the college level. And that is why he played so much so early, despite the fact that Notre Dame already had one of the best cornerback tandems in all of college football. Gray is loaded with talent, and I feel like he got enough experience last year that this isn't going to be brand new to him. He's not going to be scared, and not to mention the fact that having Benjamin Morrison makes his life a lot easier. Teams are probably going to challenge him because they have to, but I feel like the pressure is going to be taken off a little bit because he has Benjamin Morrison on the other side and then Xavier Watts working behind him. So I feel like he's going to have the freedom to go out there and play ball and do what he does best. I'm not sure if he's going to lock down the field corner job in the spring, but I have a feeling that it's going to become pretty clear that the coaching staff is not going to be able to take Gray off the field, whether that's at field corner, nickel, wherever, and he's going to be one of the most promising players on this defense going forward. All right, coming up next, my fifth and final X Factor, plus I got to give out some honorable mentions who just missed the cut. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Okay, coming in at number 5 on my list of the biggest X factors on Notre Dame's roster, heading into spring, I've got wide receiver Jaden Greathouse. Notre Dame is in desperate need of a true wide receiver one. Tell me if you've heard that before, right? This has been a problem that's been going on for years. Ever since Chase Claypool left after that 2019 season, Notre Dame has really been searching for a true wide receiver number 1, and they just haven't found it yet. But of all the guys in the room right now for Notre Dame, I think Jaden Greathouse has the best chance to be that type of player. I feel like you kind of know what you're getting in Jane Thomas, and then even Bo Collins, the transfer from Clemson, and Deion Colzie in that as well. Those guys are a little bit older. Now, Jane Thomas could still have a really good year, same with Bo Collins. I don't have super high expectations for Deion Colzie at this point, and there's certainly a lot of young guys in that room who have a ton of potential, like Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, but Greathouse is the combination of talent and experience that I feel comfortable in saying he can make the leap as a sophomore and really challenge all the receivers to be the top guy. If Greathouse is able to take that leap and he becomes the go-to guy, he becomes a clear wide receiver number 1, I believe he has the ability to do so, then the rest of the receivers can be great in their role, and it's going to make them better. No one is going to be trying to be something they're not just because the team needs a guy. That usually doesn't bode well for Notre Dame wide receivers. So if Greathouse is the clear guy, then Jane Thomas is going to be even better in his role. He's not going to be asked to do anything more. Same with a guy like Chris Mitchell, who I think certainly had a reason to be in this list, but I still feel like even though what he was able to do at Florida International was really impressive, I'm not expecting him to do anything close to that when he's at Notre Dame, even though he can still be a solid rotational wide receiver. So if you look at what Greathouse did last season, he led the team in receiving touchdowns as a true freshman with 5, and that's despite the fact that he missed some time during the middle of the year while he was dealing with the hamstring injury. He finished the year with 18 receptions for 265 yards and the 5 touchdowns that I just mentioned. He started off the season about as good as you can get. Honestly, I can't imagine a true freshman having a better first game than what Jaden Greathouse did in his first career college game against Navy. He gets 2 touchdowns in that game in Dublin, and he kind of kept that momentum going during the early part of the year. But then it really started to slow down after the Ohio State game when he suffered that hamstring injury. But then he started to pick it up a little bit again at the end of the year, starting with that Wake Forest game. That was the first time we're like, wow, there's the Jaden Greathouse that we saw earlier in the year when he broke off that long touchdown, made a big play after the catch as well. So that was really encouraging. He finished the season strong. And if you look at it, him and Rico Flores had 2 of the best seasons by a Notre Dame freshman wide receiver in a really, really long time. Now Rico is off to UCLA, and I feel like that just provides an even better opportunity for Jaden Greathouse going into his sophomore season. It's all the focus is going to be on him, especially in that class of the sophomores. It's just him and KK Smith at this point. So as we start to think about expectations for Jaden Greathouse this season, and maybe let's start with the spring here, I feel like after spring practice, we're going to look at Jaden Greathouse and think, yeah, he's got to be the guy. He might not prove that just in the spring practice. There's still going to be some room to grow throughout the summer, into the fall, and even in the season. There's a chance that Jaden Greathouse might not be wide receiver number 1 at the start of the year, but he definitely could be by the end of the year, and that would certainly bode well for Notre Dame as well. But I think of all the skilled players on the Notre Dame roster, or at least on offense, I think Greathouse is going to benefit the most from the addition of Mike Denbrock as the offensive coordinator, and we're going to start to see that in the spring. Denbrock was pretty open about the fact in his press conference that Notre Dame is going to run a lot more 11 personnel than they have before, which is going to include 3 wide receivers on the field at the same time. This is especially important for Greathouse because he played a lot in the slot last year. Now, he can move around. He can play different receiver spots. He's also got Jordan Faison, who's going to play some slot receiver as well, even though he's with a lacrosse team during the spring. I think Faison's going to have a little bit of involvement during spring practice with the football team, but I'm not really sure. Either way, that just adds to what Greathouse can do over the course of these next few weeks once spring practice gets up and rolling here. So if Greathouse is on the field all the time because Notre Dame has wide receivers on the field all the time, then he's going to have a lot more opportunities to make some plays. Greathouse is also a guy who can do a bunch of different things for you on offense. He can be a guy as a possession receiver who can make plays in short yardage situations. He can make contested catches. He can run after the catch. And we saw that he can make a play on the deep ball as well. So I think he has a ton of different tools that not every Notre Dame receiver has. And I just feel like he is in a prime position to have a really big season for the Irish. And other guys are going to have their moments for sure. There's going to be some times where I feel like Jaden Thomas is going to look like he could be wide receiver one, or maybe Chris Mitchell really just lights it up a couple days in practice. But Greathouse is probably the most consistent out of any of those guys, and I think that he is the highest ceiling, and we're going to start to see that after spring ball. All right, honorable mentions here. I got Viper Bubakar Traore. He barely played last season. His one big play came against USC. He made a critical sack on Caleb Williams and then promptly got a celebration penalty, which kind of took away some of the luster from that moment. But in that play, you could kind of see how special Traore could be. He just made one move on the right tackle, blew right by him, made the play in the backfield in a critical situation. So that was really exciting. The Notre Dame coaching staff has raved about what he could be. He's still very raw. He still has to fine-tune his abilities, but he's a player who I'm really excited about. I think he could play a lot this season. I also got Jaden Mickey. I mentioned him earlier when I was talking about Christian Gray. Like I've always said, I'm more of a Christian Gray guy than a Jaden Mickey guy, but if Jaden Mickey steps up and makes some plays, then I'm totally open to the idea of Jaden Mickey forcing his way onto the field this season, and Notre Dame definitely needs him regardless. Even if Christian Gray really lights it up in spring practice, you need a really solid reserve cornerback, and Jaden Mickey can absolutely be that for the Irish. Then I've got running back Jaden Price. Could have picked Jeremiah Love in this as well. Notre Dame has to replace Audric Estime, and Estime obviously took up the bulk of the carries last season, even though Dylan McCullough still like to rotate a lot of guys. Jaden Price got a lot of action, sort of sparingly, but then in that bowl game when everyone thought that Jeremiah Love was going to be the main guy, and Love had a pretty solid game. He had that nice touchdown on a catch. It was actually Jaden Price who was the leading rusher, and I feel like he is just itching to get back to the player that we heard so much about when he was an early enrollee freshman, had that great spring practice, then suffered the torn Achilles injury that wiped out his season. I feel like last season he was still recovering. Next season, he should be fully healthy, ready to go, and ready to have a big year as Notre Dame's number one back. And lastly, I got Jaden Osbury. If it's not going to be Jaylen Sneed at linebacker, it's got to be Jaden Osbury. They both play the Rover. Max Bulla was very complimentary of Osbury and what he's going to be as a player for Notre Dame and for the Fighting Irish. I feel like he's a guy who had a lot to learn as a true freshman, but we started to see glimpses of his ability during that spring game. You're like, whoa, Jaden Osbury. He's a really good player, and I guess it shouldn't really be that surprising. Top-rated recruit coming out of high school from Louisiana, a place that produces a bunch of great high school football talent. So if Jaylen Sneed is not able to live up to the expectations that we have for him, that gives Jaden Osbury a great chance to make a name for himself going into his redshirt freshman season, and I could definitely see him making some plays, even if he's sort of a reserve role. I think Notre Dame is going to rotate a little bit more, or rotate a lot more at linebacker than they have in recent years without Bertrand and Leofau, and I think Osbury is going to benefit from that, and he's going to make some plays. All right. That's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. We got Luke Smith back on the show tomorrow. We got a lot to get into. The men's hoops team got a huge win on Tuesday night. I would say their second biggest win of the season, which is contrary to what the commentators are saying throughout the game. So I'm sure we're going to talk about that. It's the fourth consecutive win for the Irish men's basketball team. Plenty of football stuff to get into as well. Then we're going to bring the mailbag back on Friday after a week off. So if you've got some thoughts or questions you want to be featured on the mailbag, send them my way. You can drop them in the comments below. If you're watching on YouTube, you can send them on X at Locked On Irish or via Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. Also, please subscribe from wherever it is that you tuned in today, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.